Welcome back to the My Generation podcast. Today we'll be talking about cinematography, framing, camera movement and lighting. We're going to be talking with Charlie Hedges, who is a film production student from Canterbury. Now, my name is Max Barrett, the host of the podcast, and I do radio and film work. But one of the areas that's always fascinated me, that I've had sort of no real talent in at all, is the subject of cinematography. So we're going to talk to Charlie about his inspirations and some of the work he does. Thank you for coming on the show, Charlie.
Absolutely no problem. Thank you for having me. I do apologise if I have a stutter every now and then. I tend to fumble my words a little bit when I get excited.
Absolutely no problem. Well, this is your key subject, so this should be good for you.
Yeah.
So your journey through cinematography, can you first paint a picture of like what got you into cinematography?
I think when you get into film, I think automatically you think, I want to be a director. Director, that's like the first thing you think. And then you start to learn there's lighting, there's editing, there's so much that goes into it, it's ridiculous. And then I just genuinely found myself, I wanted to be the person who decided how something was shot. I really liked the visual aspect of it. And so then I discovered cinematography, and it was basically the alternative of photography. So it was just the moving image rather than the still image. And I just became more attached to, I want to be given a narrative, I want to be given an action, and I want to present it in the best way it can be possibly done. And that's pretty much where it came along. And then obviously you go through the academic system and you learn, how can I get into this? How can I do this for a living?
And was there sort of a film that you watched that sort of kick-started this, where you looked at it and thought, I want to start framing things, that moment where you changed from what everyone wants when you're a director to being a cinematographer?
I'd probably say, if it was back in the day, tough question, because I have a lot of guilty pleasures that are like films that are not really, you would never get an Oscar or anything for them, but they are very good. I'd say when I was first introduced to Pulp Fiction, Pulp Fiction's a film where even narratively, it's so new when you first watch it. It's so like, you watch it first time and you think, okay, right, so it's definitely not chronological. It was so much stuff happening at once. And I think that sort of framing, and then gradually, step by step, you start to acknowledge things. And the thing is about cinematography, there's so many different styles of it that you just begin to appreciate it more.
And in terms of style, what would you say your style is?
I think in terms of my style, I always try and go a little bit left. So like, for example, the Amazon series, Mr. Robot, they always, in cinematography, there's a thing called the rule of thirds. And it's basically where you would divide the screen into multiple squares, and standardly you had your protagonist in the middle. And in Mr. Robot, they always have you off-centered. It's never centered, it's never normal. So you always feel like something's sort of off. And I feel like I try to bring that in the sense of uniqueness. I want to sort of not be the standard. I want to make you think, okay, well, why has he done that? There's got to be a reason behind that.
Yeah, and sort of giving it a sort of a narrative justification. But
Yeah.
At the moment, you're sort of studying cinematography, and like you're using all these new techniques to add to your like color palette of things you can do. What are some of the new things that you've learned that you've sort of added to your cinematography toolkit?
I've 100% learned that you can't just do something just because it looks nice. Like, you really need to have motivation behind what you're doing. There are times where, say if you're just having your character walk down a hallway, someone's not going to ask you, okay, so why did you choose to have that? Like, there's motivation based off of the character and how they're dealing in the theme, how they're dealing in that situation in the scene. Like, there's always loads of different alternatives you need to include. But in terms of what I've learned so far in the course, definitely more specifically with composition, lighting, and camera movement. That is pretty much the three keys of cinematography. You want to learn how to bring it all together and the best possible way of producing this scene. Otherwise, it's just, you're doing it just to do it, really.
Yeah, and we've sort of touched on just briefly there about framing and how you try and keep things sort of off, just to keep, I guess, a spontaneity to it. Let's talk about the other two areas, like camera movement. Have you been using any particular setups for movement? What's the way that you do that?
Well, I mean, we've had somebody come in called Kieran Coyle. He works for the BBC. He's been an absolute amazing input into the course. I genuinely think he's been the best thing. And he's taught us a lot in terms of camera movement. you have to plan what you're going to do. Don't go in and waffle it about. Like, planning is so essential, it's ridiculous. And it's more to do with equipment. So what you want to do is you want to think what you want to do. So for example, if we have a Reservoir Dog style poker scene, which is what we did similar to our task, you know you're going to want to do a circle around that shot. You're going to want to do a slight pan whilst you're doing it, because you can't just have the camera straight still going around it. You want to have that camera still frame the characters talking, things like that. And so once you know what you want to do, you want to think what's the best equipment to achieve it. So things like that, you can put tracks down, which I would personally say you could probably do it better with a dolly if you have the right control. If the surface is fine, I would stick on a dolly. If not, yeah, tracks is probably the best way to go. But you have to make sure you're doing stuff like staying still, setting off, staying still again. Like, you just have to put a safety net down for yourself.
So is that like you start still and then go into motion, but do you do it slowly or does it go straight to full speed?
You want to go still, slow, fastish, depending on what shot you're trying to get, and then slow, and then still. So you should end up with 3 shots, 2 stills and 1 full movement.
Interesting. And so what kit have you been using for your poker scene that you did?
For that scene, we stuck with the dolly quite a lot, just because we felt like it was, regarding our space, it allowed us a lot more freedom. Obviously, the camera is the Blackmagic Ursa Pro. Didn't focus too much on lighting for that task. It was more for the equipment around it. We have another little camera called the Osmo, and it's similar to like a handheld GoPro-y sort of style. It will follow you, it will lock onto you, and then you can move all around the room and it will stay locked onto you. That's really good for our bird eye view shots whenever we wanted to sort of come down a little bit. Trying to think what else equipment wise we used.
The Osmo is obviously quite compact as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very it allows a lot of freedom, the Osmo, especially compared to the Blackmagic. Like, realistically with the Ursa, it's made to be on a tripod really, if not a big steady cam grip. But when it comes to the Osmo, you have so much more freedom. You can go up, down, at 360 it all, but you have to, as I said, that you have to plan. You gotta know what you're gonna do, and you have to think, why have we chose the Osmo for this shot? So for example, there's a shot where I'm walking into the set, and you can come down low and then come back up again. And with the Osmo, it's so easy. Like, you literally do it with one hand. You're holding down, and as you're lifting up, because the Osmo is tracked onto me, it won't lose me out of shot. I will still be in frame composition-wise perfectly. I've just literally, it's almost like literally raising. It's almost like using a mini crane, you know, in a sense. It's just your arms to crane.
And do you hold the Osmo quite close to your body? Is there or does that not matter because it's all sort of a motorized gimbal, effectively?
I'd say in terms of, if you want it to be stable, hold it close. Just in terms of natural body balance, you're going to be more firmer rather than if you're out, because when you're out, you're going to allow your muscles to sort of, they might give in a little bit. You might be more shaky. If you was 2 hands firmly closer to your chest, maybe, and you wanted to walk backwards, obviously make sure someone's behind you, you'd be a lot more firmer, you'd be a lot more able to keep everything in track and everything in shot smoothly. But as I said, it being an Osmo, you have so much more freedom. So if you do want to do a more outlandish shot, like for example a chase sequence, there's another group that did a chase sequence, and with the Osmo it allows so much more like rush cam sort of thing, like fast cam. Everybody loves that for a speed sequence because it just sort of, it allows the viewer to feel like they're involved in it.
Yeah, and you said about planning. You knew that you were going to do some the shots, so it's about planning your kit way before you even go on the set, because you knew you needed the Osmo to complement the Ursa. And so this is obviously university related kit. Have you started building out your own kit at home as well?
Well, I began more visually, but then I became more attached to hiring the kit rather than buying the kit, because obviously being a uni student, there's loads of things you have to afford and things like that. It might be a struggle at times, but realistically, Kieran, who helped us on the cinematography course, he recommends himself, even he professionally working for the BBC, they will hire out kit. And it's just, if you need that best image, or if you need that best camera movement, lighting, any audio. Even same thing goes for sound. Like if you need it, it's probably best that you will rent it out so that you've at least got it, and then you can return it because you're not going to break it, hopefully, depending on what you're doing.
And it sort of suits the project because you might need, like, say, if you're hiring an Ursa, you need it for one, but maybe it doesn't suit a car chase scene. So
yeah, realistically, but there are cameras that will mix the productivity of an Osmo and an Ursa. Like you just have to go out and find it. Really, it's all about research.
Well, one example of the sort of jack of all trades is like camcorders. So like a Sony NX80, or which you've used the Panasonic UX90s.
Yeah.
And how does that sort of fit into the picture of how you've used things?
I think with those specifically, it's less to play about with the actual camera settings. It's more to do with lighting and what you do practically with it, because there's a lot of good things on those cameras. They'll do a lot of manual stuff, but they'll also do a lot more automatic stuff. So like we found ourselves using quite a lot of the automatic focus for things. We found, I think in terms of that camera specifically, I think its focus is really good to use, and its quality up close in order to capture loads of small details. It's actually a lot more high quality than it comes off. Like it probably deserves a lot more credit, that camera. The only thing is some cameras offered here, some might be just still only, some might offer both. I know they are looking into getting the mixture next year. I literally had a brief discussion with Kieran about what they're looking for next year in terms of equipment, but I'd definitely say it becomes to a lot of advantages in terms of its ability to capture quality. You just got its lens, really. I think lens, that's one thing learning through uni, is that it's the lens, multiple ranges of them that you need to get right.
And in terms of, you've done some narrative stuff, and you've done some stills, and what was it like lighting? Because that's sort of the one area we haven't covered in terms of the sort of scope of what you're using to paint a picture on screen. You've done some still work. What was it like lighting that?
With our still work, it was more, we didn't have narrative with that, so that was kind of an advantage because it felt a little bit more like a photography task in that sense, but that's why photography and cinematography become so hand in hand. But you have multiple things, so like one thing we were introduced to was 3-point lighting. You've got your fill light, you've got one to your left, one to your right. You want the fill light slightly more dimmed because it's not the main light, and then you also have your backlight behind you, and it's basically just lighting your subject as best as possible. It's most used in like interviews as such. So like you'll have high key lighting and low key lighting. And low key lighting is your dramatic effect, your peaky blinders, your films, that sort of thing. Like something that creates more of a serious tone. And then like high key lighting, that's more for like films in the sense of they're on television, like more television programs, if anything, like interviews specifically. Like you might be watching This Morning and you'll notice it's so bright compared to if you was watching a dark drama. But that's the sort of things you'll be learning against it in terms of lighting. We learned a lot with the gels. Gels literally became my best friend on that shoot, because when you learn the color palette and you learn things that correlate with one another, you can use the triangular colors that would like come together on the color wheel, or you can use opposite colors. I believe complementary colors is what the term is officially, but once you learn the colors and what ones you want to put against each other, you start to learn things like different types of lines. So like you've got Rembrandt, who it will create, on a poster such as the Moonlight poster is probably a good example. You'll see a slight triangle on the face there. That'll be where it's Rembrandt. And then when it begins to open up here, but just below the nose, obviously I'm saying here on the audio, but just below your nose, when that starts to open up within lighting, that's when it becomes a loop. And then you've got things where it might just be a straight split down your middle of your face. So we, for example, played about we had a green gel on one hand, and then on one side, and we had another red gel on the other side. And there was no height to it. They were both equal height, so then it just creates a straight split down the middle. We had a little bit of backlight just to create a bit of like atmosphere, but other than that, I believe there's so much you can play with. Like so much you can play with. Like literally just the difference between heightening a light creates a completely different tone.
Yeah, because I bet with that sort of level playing field you had, if you raised one of the filters, it would overpower the other one, wouldn't it?
100%. Oh yeah, you can't have lights fighting against each other. You can't. Like, you either like extend your light source, or you just leave it. Like, you have to improvise. But one thing about lighting is daylight and the sun. It's your best friend. Like, so many people are scared of it. It is your best light source in terms of like recording anything, really. You just have to use it the right way.
Well, the sun's a natural diffuser.
Exactly.
What would you say about using diffusers? Because do your lights point directly at the subject, or are you bouncing the light?
Depends what tone you want to use. I mean, when you're creating an image such as a Rembrandt image, and you want to have quite a serious tone, it might look like something out of like a magazine or something. You want to use a little bit of reflectors and diffusers to sort of like... You'd use a reflector more to bring a little bit more light to the situation. With diffusers, you'd probably be using it to create more of a tone narratively for what you need. So, for example, within the Joker, there's the scene within the elevator where it's all coming from above, and you have quite raccoon eyes. They're quite pointy, and there's a heavy backlight on him. There's quite a little bit on the front as well. However, you have such darkness in that bit, and you do stuff like that using diffusers because you want to have the lights even out. You can't have lights that are dramatically stronger than others unless you're really trying to go for something such as like daylight through the curtains. You would have quite a lot of overexposure. It's used a lot in Peaky Blinders. If you watch Peaky Blinders, you'll notice within the bar, if you look at the windows, it's like steaming through. It's really powerful.
But that's almost like a film noir kind of thing where you've got harsh lighting.
Oh yeah, 100%. You'd get that a lot of the time. Like with going back to the Joker image, you get a lot of connections with it. So like, for example, there's the famous phrase of the eyes are the window to the soul, things like that. You black out that soul. You've not only created a darker image, you've also created another theory in the sense of connecting it to the narrative. You've told so much just through lighting, and you need to be able to understand what's appropriate and what's not appropriate.
And lighting probably goes so under the radar.
It honestly does, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people underestimate how much it's not like that's probably not just a lamp there. There's probably 2 other lights on that actor or something like that. That's why people praise The Revenant so much. It's just all daylight. It's all natural light. They use very, very little lights on set. And that's why it's such an impressive film, and it won its cinematography and how it did. But I think in terms of defusing, yeah, you just have to use it at the appropriate times. But we've been learning a little bit more in and out on that. We're still in early doors on how to perfect it.
And we're going to be going to Charlie in just a moment to talk about his inspirations. But I just wanted to punt a new thing we've got coming to the podcast as well. Thank you, Charlie, for sharing what you've had so far about cinematography. Talked mostly about the process at the minute. Inspirations next. But every week on the podcast, music enthusiast Sammy Bacon from Canterbury, he brings us a 1-minute quickfire album recommendation. So every single week on the show, you've got a new album to listen to. New music always every week. And here is the album that Sammy recommends this week.
Hi everyone, Sammy Bacon here to give you another album recommendation, and the recommendation this week comes from Nick Cave in the Bad Seeds, and it's their 2016 release, Skeleton Tree. Skeleton Tree kind of continues on with some of the sounds Nick Cave in the Bad Seeds had been experimenting on with their previous album, Push the Sky Away, in terms of bringing in more electronic aspects and kind of diminishing the roles of guitars and drums, percussion, etc. And what makes this album so brilliant and such a masterpiece is the context surrounding it. During the writing and the producing of this album, unfortunately, Nick Cave's son, Arthur Cave, passed away, and this album sort of turns into a documentary of his initial grief with themes of death, mundane life, and grief, as I said. There was also a really interesting documentary that was released around the same time as this, which also serves as more of a visual representation of this album, Nick Cave's grief, which is called put One More Time with Feeling. And in that documentary, Nick Cave talks about being in the line of a bakery and someone touching his arm saying, "We're with you, man." And he says he felt angry and as if he'd become an object of pity. And I think that and Skeleton Tree kind of really poetically and concisely sum up the initial feelings after grief, after someone died, rather. The lyrics are abstract and confusing, and none of them directly refer to Arthur Cave or death in itself, but I think the abstractness of the lyricism and the confusion kind of does represent the initial kind of tidal wave of emotions that grief brings. Even the title Skeleton Tree, I think, reflects the vulnerability that Nick Cave must have been feeling after this. It's just a masterpiece with great tracks. Like the opener, Jesus Alone, I think perfectly contrasts with the closer. Jesus Alone opens with this icy, crunchy, growling bass line, synth bass rather, and then the closer, Skeleton Tree, is this very gentle track, and it's almost sort of what happens when the dust settles, I guess, with the closing lines of the song being, "And it's all right now." It's just a masterpiece. Please listen to it. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Skeleton Tree. See you next time.
And back to Charlie now. We're going to be talking about inspirations. So, Charlie, what are the films or what are the still images that have inspired you? And maybe one that's inspired you in terms of cinematography, one that's framing, one that's lighting and movement. Is there a film each?
I'd say, yeah, because it's less, for me, it's less stills, and a lot of it comes to films and scenes as a whole. So
yeah,
one of the most impressive things I feel like with lighting is its ability to manipulate. And one of the strongest ones in that is the director, James Wan. He uses a very strong, he's DOP, he does a lot of mixture with darkness and things. So for example, one of the ones that hit me very intensely, like it was one scene that I remember, it stuck with me so much how it was able to just manipulate, and it was in the horror film The Conjuring 2. I'm not sure if you've seen it or anything.
No.
Yeah, might be one not to watch with the lights off, but so there's this scene, and it's a lot of depth within it. It's like a very long corridor, and the camera's to the left. You've got the young boy, and he looks and he sees there's like this playhouse thing down the end of the corridor. It's very dark. It's very, only really moonlight is being lit within it, that blue ominous tone. And he keeps checking, and the camera pans to the side, and it shows the long corridor, and there's nothing happening. You see absolutely nothing change. So then it pans back, and he hears the noise again. And then it pans back again, and nothing's changed. But you can always see the corridor in shot.
Yeah.
And yet nothing has changed at all. It's the same shot, same lit. No, like, it's dark, but there's no manipulation. There's no change at all. So its ability to manipulate you and have you so terrified for something to happen, it's just, that's what impressed me so much.
You're expecting something to come down the corridor.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's even a case of your eyes start to play tricks on you. Like you sit there and you think, is that a face there, or is there something moving there? And so that was for horror. Horror is something that I think lighting excels in. Like it makes you really think there's something there. In terms of camera movement, definitely Matthew Vaughn's DOP with Kingsman. Their action scenes are ridiculously smooth.
Are you going to talk about the church scene?
Oh, the church scene is amazing. Like you've got the church scene, you've got the intro to the sequel where they're in the taxi car, or even the fight scenes at the end. Like it's tilts, it's angles, it's so alternative and it's so smoothly done. That everything, it just seemed, and it's so incredibly choreographed, whoever did that, especially that church scene. Like, because it just doesn't start, and it generally feels like you're in there and everything's kicking off, and the camera movement flows so smoothly through each bit, but yet so rough at the same time. It's so impressive, ridiculously impressive. I'd say in terms of composition, maybe Mr. Robot again. That's probably one that maybe stuck out a little bit more, or Shutter Island. Yeah, like with their continuity, like that's more probably leaning towards the editing side, but what they do in terms of how they choose their characters to act and how they choose to have the framing of each and every character shows more of a dominance role and their power. Who's the protagonist? Who's in the edge? But yeah, I mean, those are probably a few standout ones for me. Influences, I get influenced by quite a few. Tarantino is incredible for movement. Tarantino, you'll notice a lot in specifically Django Unchained, pop zooms. He loves them.
He does.
But yeah, it's such a comedic and outdated thing to do. Like, it shouldn't work, but yet it works every time, and it's really impressive, to be fair. But I'd say one other one with lighting, Blade Runner.
Oh, 2049?
Yeah, 2049.
I love that.
That cinematography is just beautiful.
I was going to bring up this movie.
It's beautiful, isn't it? It's amazing. Like, just the lighting used.
It's Roger Deakins, right?
Yeah. And it's just, I love neon. I don't know about you, but like, I see cities like Tokyo and everything like that, and even London most times, and I'm like, that just looks beautiful. The colour is so beautiful.
But each environment has its own thing, because there's the blueness of the sort of undercity, but then you've got, like, is it New York or LA where it's like destroyed and it's all orange?
I think it's LA.
Yeah, and it's all burnt out orange, and every environment's got such a harsh contrast, and you got like the whites of like where the tree is.
Yeah, it's really well done, and they do stuff with like the smoke and everything, and it's all with things like that. They have to adjust their lighting for that.
Yeah,
like they really do have to make sure that you can get that smoke in. And the thing is about that film is there's a lot of after effects, but in terms of lighting, not a lot changes. You'll be surprised if you look at the on-set pictures. There are not a lot changes, and it's really impressive.
Yeah, and just a couple other examples of things I wanted to bring up to see if you've seen them. Speaking of James Wan, you mentioned earlier, have you seen Aquaman?
I have seen Aquaman.
I know
that's amazing.
The camera movement's great in terms of the fight scenes because it's all done in wides. But I'm talking the nightmare scene on the little boat.
Yeah. I understand what you mean by that in terms of its movement.
But in terms of the lighting.
It's great.
There's that one shot where they jump into the water and like the lightning's coming in. Yeah, that's
that I think so much of that is post.
I mean, yeah.
But at the same time, it's still lighting, it's still cinematography. It doesn't have to be on set and everything like that. That I know I keep thinking of the chase scene with when they're going on the rooftops and everything.
Yes,
that is one of the most like impressive camera movement things because not a lot of that is in post. Like, no, I watched the behind the scenes of it, and the cameraman literally jumps down and follows the actor going through the walls, and when he jumps down with him, obviously harnessed up, safety first. He follows him all through it, and there's literally a camera from the outside of the building on the window following them along. So not only have you got two paths, you've literally got one outside of a building on the side following him, and he comes out and he jumps out with it.
So you got two cameras on harnesses moving with the actor. It's
crazy.
Amazing.
It's crazy.
Oh, and have you seen Upgrade as well in terms of fight scenes?
I haven't seen Upgrade.
I think you'd love that.
It's on my watch list, but unfortunately I haven't seen it.
Because one thing I love about that is that the camera movement follows the movement of the protagonist. So when he's throwing a punch in a fight scene, the camera's following with his arms movement,
going along.
And if he's the camera will be impartial. It will be focused on two of them.
Yeah.
But if he's swiping, the camera's swiping, and if he falls backwards, the camera will spin.
Yeah.
And if he's like cartwheeling over someone, the camera will fully 360 with his cartwheel. Yeah. It's just all that.
Yeah. Similar to Kingsman, but that big step forward. Like in Kingsman, where they're following, like if he's punching that way, the camera's following the action.
Yeah.
But I can assume from what you've said, Upgrade, they've just taken it to another level.
Yeah.
Like flipping around and all that.
What do you think about movies like Hardcore Henry?
It's just, Hardcore Henry's just like a massive playground. Like Hardcore Henry's like, for a cinematographer and a cameraman specifically, like, it's just a massive, like literally playground. Like, I think they literally just threw whatever they could into that.
Well, the cameraman's the protagonist.
Yeah, I know. Like, it's literally...
It's all a POV.
It's definitely groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Like, there's... you always hear rumours of films that are going to be filmed all in one shot and things like that, and they never really do it. There's always smart cuts that they do in it. But Hardcore Henry, the fact that it's all like first person and it's him, it's the first of its kind from what I know. It did pretty well at the box, did it?
Yeah, well, it was just a bit of fun. It did all right at the box office considering what it was. It was quite a small film.
Yeah, because it was quite budget.
Well, it's interesting what you said about films that try to be one-take movies.
Yeah.
I know that obviously this podcast will have come out after this movie has been released, but 1917's obviously doing that.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But did you see the movie called Victoria, which came out in either 2015 or 2016?
No.
It's I believe a German movie, or at the very least it's set in Germany, and that movie is all done in one take. I think they started filming at 5 a.m. In Germany in like a bar or club, and they finished filming at 7:30 when the film wraps, and it all is done in one take. That film has its own problems, because it is literally, the camera does not stop. It is all one continuous take.
Naturally, you're gonna get that though, aren't you? Like, I mean, that is like, I mean, it's impressive, but you're not going to get the stronger film out of it at all by any means. However, that was 1917, isn't it?
Yeah, the new one.
I've heard people say that's literally meant to be the best war film since like Saving Private Ryan. Like,
wow.
It really excites me. And it's got a great cast, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Really good cast involved in it. I've seen a couple of the DOPs that I put on that. It's meant to be quite good. But I've heard I reckon it's going to be really good, that one.
Do you do quite a lot of research into the directors of photography, that being DOP?
Yeah. I mean, you have to, really. Like, you have to look into... You begin to watch a film and you think, okay, so this person directed it. Who's his DOP? Or like, for example, a DOP's relationship with the director and the editor is very significant. And you see a lot of people collab very frequently. Like Tarantino, for example, uses the same editor a lot because he knows, she knows, like how he wants it. Sorry. Scorsese does it a lot. Has a very similar editor every single time.
You build a team that you feel comfortable working around. I know Wes Anderson's big on that as well.
Yeah. You can't have a team that not only has no chemistry but doesn't understand what you're trying to achieve. You really can't do that. You really have to have everything. But in terms of research, you have to do it. If you want to be in the lane and you want to be competing, you have to know who your competitors are and you have to know who the top dogs are. And how this industry works in any art industry is you get your style from copying off of other people. Like, I know I keep bringing him up, but Tarantino is known as a very iconic directing style. He ripped off a loads of films in his earlier days. Like, he will even admit to it himself. Your best thing is to use your mentors, use your advisors, take their strengths and just create your own with them. Become that sort of hybrid. And that's where you'll get your style, 100%.
Lovely. Well, we're going to go back to Charlie in just a moment to continue the conversation about cinematography. But do you have a story to tell about the subject? If so, contact the Facebook page at the My Generation Podcast. We'd love to keep this conversation going and get some of your thoughts over to Charlie. And maybe even, Charlie, can people find some of your work somewhere?
Yeah, I'm in the process of making like a proper profile for everything now, but as it goes at the moment, it's just my Instagram is Charlie_Hedges, and that's probably your best bit of finding me in terms of where I'm most active. Facebook and LinkedIn and stuff, I'll be in the process of getting stuff like that sorted.
Lovely. And we also talk about local impact on the show, being a very Kent-based show. What would you recommend if someone wanted to get into cinematography in the area of Kent? What would you recommend they do to get involved?
I can recommend Canterbury Christ Church. I can really recommend it. They do provide a very solid support and everything, and they do offer great services, especially in terms of how you can get the equipment and stuff. Obviously, you have other film schools available within the area. There's the Arts University, mainly within Canterbury. I just feel like my best advice is networking. Like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there and make sure you talk to people, but I definitely think academically, if you want to stay within it, I think Christchurch or Uni of Kent is good. You want to get practical, realistically. You're never going to step on a set and someone's going to ask you, tell me 2,000 words about so-and-so. Do you know what I mean? Like, unless you want to be a film critic, that's fine. But if you want to be director, not writer maybe, cinematographer, then you want to be going down the practical route.
And we're just going to tease before we ask Charlie one of my favourite questions. We're going to tease a few more topics we've got coming up on the podcast in the next few weeks. So we're bringing on, you'll know him, Lewis Kennedy.
Oh, lovely guy. Really nice guy.
And we're going to be talking, rather than about cinematography, we're going to be talking about the freelance filmmaker life. Lewis is a freelance filmmaker, and we're going to talk about what it's like being in that world. We're also going to be talking to Sammy. She was on the 11th episode of the podcast about meditation, and we're going to be going back to that subject to go into more detail. And also Joe Finnegan. He was on the podcast for the Halloween special. He's coming on to talk about passion projects, namely a game design passion project that he had. Now, Charlie, my favourite question to ask at the end of every episode, what do you think you've learned by talking about cinematography on the show today?
That's a great question. Feels like hot ones when we've got great questions. I think I'd say I've learned what I've acknowledged everything I've learned and stuff. I think I've learned that I need to reminisce more. Like when it's like asking, you'll know this completely when you tell people you study film and then they go up to you and they say, "What's your favourite film?" And, oh my god, like I can't. There's so many. Like you have your list, but you can't say one. I'd say I've learned how important the aspects of cinematography is in terms of composition and camera movement and lighting. Especially, I always try to learn more on why you're doing it rather than how you're doing it.
Lovely. Well, thank you.
Thank you. You got a very amazing podcast voice.
Oh, well, thank you. He's far too kind, far too kind. And we're definitely going to be getting Charlie back on the podcast to elaborate on in more detail and go over some more films as well, potentially.
Yeah, I'd love to.
I just want to tease some more things. We've got some future topics we're still looking for people to talk about. So we talked very early in the podcast about sport and community, mental health within sport. I want to revisit that, talking about any sports you do, how it affects you. Maybe you're an amateur professional, maybe that sport has transformed something within your life and turned around your mental health. If so, get in touch with the Facebook page at the My Generation Podcast if you're between the ages of 18 and 35 and you live in the area of Kent, so we can get you on the show to talk. You can always find the Facebook page in the description. We're going to be posting questions for future topics, so feature and potentially featuring your answers to those topics on episodes of the podcast if you want to get involved that way. Again, in the YouTube description. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Charlie.
Thank you very much. I mean, I tried my best to sound as professional as I could, as I'm trying my best. But no, thank you. I'm probably going to hate hearing my voice back, but I really appreciate being invited, and you've been an amazing host.
Oh, well, thank you very much for coming on. This is a professional filmmaker and cinematographer, Charlie Hedges. Roger Deakins 2, we call him here. Well, thank you very much. We've got so much new stuff coming up in the next few weeks. We're going to have Charlie back on the podcast soon as well. Thank you all very much for listening. I've been Max Barrett.
I've been Charlie Hedges.
And that's the My Generation podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week on the next episode of the My Generation podcast.